I do have hope. There are flaws in the American political system that are pretty profound. Like most Americans don't even vote. So whoever is representing us is representing only those who vote. The majority of our senators are millionaires. That doesn't reflect the general population. It's not citizen legislature. They're profound structural issues, and the effect of money in politics means that those who are representing us are answering to moneyed interests more than they are answering to us. Broadly, some of the other things that we're running into is that when you step away from politics and think about, just like the philosophical definitions of conservative, progressive, conservative means keeping things the same, and progressive means making things change. And there's actually a benefit to both. Keeping things the same is not, it can include like keeping indigenous languages alive, cultural traditions. There's a value to keeping the world recognizable and to being rooted in tradition and community and responsible to those sorts of things. There is a value to that, genuinely. I think it sometimes gets a little twisted in its political manifestations. Progressivism is saying we need things to change, and I think we can all point to things we would like to see change. Innovations in healthcare, a cure for cancer. So there's a value to both of these things. When the pace of change is very fast and the world starts looking so unrecognizable to so many people, there is often a defensive posturing of slow it down, make it stop. And sometimes it can take a very angry, unhealthy form. So I do think we're seeing some of that. By the way, Americans are so ahistorical. This has happened before in America. Yeah, we had 50% tariffs on everybody in the McKinley era. Destroyed the economy, wasn't wise, shouldn't do it. During the McCarthy era, you had one senator up there saying, I got a list of all these communists in Hollywood. They were imprisoning people, destroying their careers. And I've got a list of communists working for the US government right now. Now we forget, the pendulum is swung and there have been some pretty strong swings one way or another. That doesn't mean that I'm looking past or excusing or minimizing any of the very troubling things we're seeing happening right now. There's great cause for concern, because I do think there's an erosion of not just political norms, but systems, policies, practices, checks and balances that can stop anyone from being too powerful. And I do think that's something we need to be really worried about. At the same time, I do have a lot of hope. And there's often a big disturbance right before a big growth spurt. Growing's not always neat, clean, and easy. But the realities are pretty obvious to me, even though they might not be to everyone else. So right now, like one of the obvious manifestations, there's a real, it's not just a policy push with regard to enforcing immigration laws. There's like xenophobia going on for a lot of Americans. Get them out. And I think the biggest con that most Americans have fallen for is the con of believing that this country and the world is a zero-sum game. Meaning that if someone else is going to get something or do well, that it is necessary that it takes something away from somebody else, that it's a zero-sum game. So if women rise and do well, that it's going to be men who suffer for that. They'll be taking the jobs from the men. Or that if people of color rise, somehow it's going to be taking away white jobs. And that is a con. It is not accurate. Because what happens is if you have lots of people rising, you have more load-bearing citizens paying their taxes, who are also more fully humanized, who are growing the pie, not taking someone else's slice, growing the pie. You should see the ads from like 100 years ago when there was a push for women's suffrage and women to enter the workforce. And I don't know, maybe I've got them loaded in a different PowerPoint, so I won't bother digging them out. There's one where there's an image of a huge woman sitting right on top of this man, like squishing the life out of him. And the caption reads, "When women get the vote." Like, we look at it now 100 years later and we're like, that's ridiculous. But that was the view, that it was a zero-sum game, that there were more women in America than men. If women get the vote, they'll outvote the men, and men will become oppressed. We'll flip roles between the oppressor and oppressed. One of the greatest acknowledgments of the fact that we had oppression. The reality is, women did get the vote. There's never been a case in history where the oppressor has just liberated the oppressed. Dudes were not like, sure, give our wives and daughters the right to vote, let's go. Women had to protest, were beat with police batons, campaigned for generations, and eventually pricked the consciousness of an all-male Senate that did vote for women's suffrage. And then women did get the vote, and they did enter the workforce. And guess what happened? It grew the pie. Roaring 20s. Stock market takes off. Even though men were the primary owners of stocks and the primary financial beneficiaries of women entering the workforce, it didn't take anything away from dudes. It made dudes richer than they had ever been. It was a con that was convincing people to resist. Today, I think some people have drunk the Kool-Aid on the same con, that if people of color rise and do well, it'll be taking something from white folk. So it's not everybody, but some folks are kind of like running their politics on white grievance and fear of scarcity. And of all the ironic reactions, even things like the tariffs and the cutting of programs, like the primary financial beneficiaries of Medicaid are white Americans. The primary beneficiaries of an integrated economic system around the world are white Americans. And so that's the stuff they're attacking, and it won't even be obvious. Like, it'll start to become obvious a couple more quarters in when the effects of those things are starting to show, but it'll take years. And China's just like rebuilding their supply chain to get all their soybeans from Brazil, so even when this is over, it's going to be different. So it's kind of equipping the US to follow Great Britain into like empire of decline, which I think is not wise. But the bottom line is, like, let's pretend, for example, this will never happen, but pretend that it was actually possible to get every undocumented person out of America. Pretend that was possible. I mean, they're not even going to get a tenth of them. But pretend it's possible. And also, it's like throwing water over a chicken wire fence. Like, 65% of undocumented people come by airplane. And build as many walls as you want. And let's pretend that it's actually possible to take no more international students. Keep them all out, which will also not be possible. Even if you did all of that, the majority of the children in America are people of color, excluding all immigrants and all international students. The majority of the kids in America are people of color. That's who is here. We have to figure out how to get along. We are in this together. It might seem ironic and it might not look like it now, but actually the more diverse we become, the more homogenous we will eventually be. Because we're all falling in love with each other and making babies, and all our grandkids are going to figure out how to get along. This is what is happening. We're not going to be Star Trek Next Generation, where all the groups are represented, everyone's colorblind, and they all get along fine, and race is not it'll be like some kind of brown soup. This is the direction we're heading in. We have to figure out how to get along and how to address the issues that are keeping us divided. The division is what is holding us back, much more than anything else. There's more to say too, and I don't know if you wanted me to talk about, I think I was sharing before, like that Howard Zinn quote. He was saying, when there's a hard time, the future's not some grand utopian destination we get to. The future is an infinite succession of presents. That we remake the world in miniature every day. And we have within our power the ability to chart a course toward healing and cooperation and unity and solving big problems together. I do believe that there is cause for hope. But there is work to do. I think we do need to tackle the tough topics to get there.